What you think of the meeting?
I was really disturbed that the people on the board were extremely condescending when the issues that were brought up about the fact that they really didn't get a good input from everybody, that they were focused on groups that had an agenda like unions and walking groups and bicycling groups. That's where they were getting all their input from, and that they were ignoring the taxpayers and the Automobile Association and everybody along those lines, and they pretty much blew us off. They were extremely condescending, and they felt like they didn't have to answer to us, and that was basically the bottom line. Towards the end of the project, a whole bunch of people got up and said that they needed to consider social equity. Most of the members on that board were in agreement that social equity was an issue. They wouldn't define social equity. Generally, in my book, that means equivalent outcomes, which means that everybody's supposed to be the same in terms of result. And that's not the American way. I can understand equity in terms of opportunity, but that's not what they're doing here. It's a bunch of social engineers trying to determine the way people are going to live for the next 25 years. And my final comment is, you know, even in the Soviet Union, they only did 5-year plans. These guys are doing a 25-year plan for the Bay Area, and it's absolutely ridiculous, and they're using our tax money against us to fund their social equity agenda.
What I'd like to do real quick is have everyone go around the room real quickly and introduce yourself. Mark, we'll start with you over there on the end and come around.
Mark Lewis with the County of Napa and also on the ABAG Administrative Committee.
Jack, we're waiting on you there, buddy.
Jack Jingles, City of Calistoga Mayor.
Pierce, Council Member, City of Clayton.
Scott Wiener, San Francisco Board of Supervisors and a member of the MTC.
Bill Dodd, Napa County Board of Supervisors, member of MTC.
Dave Cortese, Santa Clara County, MTC and ABAG.
Amy Worth, Contra Costa Cities representative on MTC.
Tom Zambrano, HUD rep for MTC.
Ann Halstead, Bay Conservation Development Commission representative on MTC.
Okay.
Jake McKenzie, Sonoma County and Cities representative and MTC.
Kevin Mullen, Mayor of South San Francisco, MTC representing cities of San Mateo County.
Sam Liccardo, Councilmember City of San Jose representing MTC and ABAG.
Mark Green, the chair of the ABAG Administrative Committee and also a member of the MTC Planning Committee.
Doreen Jacopini, U.S. Department of Transportation representative on MTC.
Scott Haggerty, member of MTC and ABAG. ABAG Legal Counsel.
Ezra Rapport, Executive Director, ABAG.
Heminger with MTC.
Rose Jacobs Gibson, San Mateo County Supervisor representing ABAG's Administrative Committee.
John Joya, Contra Costa Board of Supervisors, ABAG Administration Committee.
Susan Adams, Marin County Board of Supervisors, ABAG Vice Chair.
And our two staff people.
Alex Bockelman, MTC, and I'm joined by Matt Adamo, also MTC staff.
Okay, thank you, and welcome to everyone. The first item we have is our consent calendar. Before I entertain a motion, I believe I have one speaker card on consent. Mimi Steele, Mimi, did you want to comment on that? Is it, oh, you've got three, never mind, I'm sorry. We're good. I'll entertain a motion to approve consent.
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, we did have one.
Oh, you do have one on consent here? Okay, I'll take that. We have a motion and a second, and these will be minutes for both of the committees. Sean Ackley, Sean, did you want to speak on item 2B? This is on our consent calendar.
On 2B, is there going to be time in the middle, or is this the time where we speak, or at the end, or?
Well, the item you put down is on consent, and we're taking action on consent right now. And so if you want to speak on you sure it's 2B you want to speak on and not 3B?
I want 3B also.
Okay, so you don't want to speak on consent at this time?
I just wanted to speak on the One Bay Area plan, so.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, very good. All right, entertain a motion to approve consent.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Adrian, can both committees do this at the same time, or does Mark have to ask for?
This is just our committee right now.
Okay, because you have it listed as, okay, this will be for Planning Committee. Is there any dissent? Hearing none, that motion passes unanimously. Let's move on to item 3. This is the Plan Bay area. And Alex, are you going to introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Spearing. Good morning, committee members. My name is Alex Bockelman. I'm the Director of Programming and Allocations with MTC, and I'm here today to provide an update on the Plan Bay Area financial forecast, which is just for information today. But there's also one item that I'll get to at the end, which is a minor revision to our committed funds and projects policy, and that will be for referral to the MTC Commission. Okay, so really today we're sort of setting the stage for what you will be contemplating in the fall when you get into the investment trade-off decisions. So what I'm going to provide today is a look at the financial envelope that you'll be working with. Based on our current projections, we are looking at a total revenue for the Plan Bay Area period of about $244 billion. This compares with $218 billion in Transportation 2035, so roughly a 10% increase. And really the increase is more because the time horizon is slightly longer. In most cases, we've tried to be a little more conservative in terms of growth assumptions, as I'll get into a little bit more. A few items worth noting just on the methodology side for doing the revenue projections. We have made some changes since our last plan. One is we've tried to have greater consistency between the planning and travel model assumptions in the area of, for example, consumption and fuel price than we've had in the past between our revenue projections and our travel model. Also, greater consistency with the Sustainable Community Strategy demographic forecast. So, some of those in terms of population forecasts and jobs also fit into sales tax growth. So there's more consistency between the forecast on both sides. As I mentioned, it is a longer time horizon, 28 years versus 25 years, and we've assumed a lower annual inflation as compared to the last long-range plan. Moving on to the federal funds, in terms of actually the assumptions behind the revenue projections for federal funds, we are assuming a slightly lower growth rate. The federal funds generally comprise the Federal Transit Administration funds and the Federal Highway Administration funds. We're assuming a lower growth rate. And really this has to do with the pretty great uncertainty that we see at the federal level in terms of this authorization and also just the revenue that will support the federal program. So that's why we are reducing the growth rate from 4% to 3%. In terms of the state funds that we've projected in this revenue forecast, they are largely based on fuel tax revenues. So there's a reliance both in terms of fuel tax revenue from both the consumption and the price side. As I mentioned, on the price side, we are being consistent with the travel demand model, and all the MPOs in the state are using similar price assumptions. In terms of fuel consumption, we are assuming full implementation of PAVLI and adherence to the low carbon standard. And so really what that means is, I'll show you in the next chart, is we're forecasting much lower consumption as the passenger cars become more green and we have less carbon intensity in the fuel. So this chart illustrates the fuel price and consumption that's projected over the Plan Bay Area period. And again, this really does drive some of the revenue forecasts. And as you can see on the green line, which is the fuel price increases significantly during the first 7-year period and then moderates a bit, but continues to increase over the plan period. The blue or purple line is consumption, and as you see, it decreases quite significantly and then slowly starts to increase again over the later half of the plan period. Moving to the local funds, which is really the largest component of our revenue projections. Most of these funds are really tied to a specific transit operator or to a specific county. As you can see in the chart, sales tax is sort of the largest component of the local funds at about 48 billion. That's about 40% of the overall local funds. Also, transit operator revenues and fares make up a really significant component of the local funds. So, for example, a transit operator specific revenue source would be, in San Francisco, they have a lot of general fund revenue, and that's included in there. So that gives you a sense of the local funds. We have relied generally on information from the transit operators in terms of projecting their fare revenue and their specific revenue sources. Another component that goes into the revenue projections is on the regional fund side, and the majority of this really is coming from bridge tolls, as well as some sales tax for the multi-county BART area, the AB 1107 sales tax. One thing that's new in this projection is we are assuming one $1 toll increase over the planned Bay Area period, which would generate roughly $2.7 billion. That is different in terms of assumptions from Transportation 2035. As I mentioned, sales tax revenue is sort of the largest component of local funds, so I just wanted to say a few more words about sales tax revenue. The largest components that are listed, 1 and 2, Transportation Development Act and AB 1107, or sorry, 2 of the components are really tied to transit, so those sales taxes really fund transit service. And for those growth projections, we have relied on an ABAG model of growth for sales tax, and that is directly tied to the demographic forecast for the rest of the sustainable community strategy. In terms of the county sales taxes, the local option sales taxes in 7 of the counties, we've actually relied on the county estimates for those revenue projections to ensure consistency with their expenditure plans and their own financial modeling. We do assume one difference from the last plan and what we're proposing here is we do assume that county sales tax measures will be reauthorized, so that if there is a sales tax measure, that it will be reauthorized over the period so that you have continuous funding. And we are proposing that those reauthorized revenues be deemed committed in terms of the revenue projections. So one other area of the revenue projections is what we're calling reasonably anticipated funding, and this was also included in Transportation 2035. And this is really funding that is likely to become available from federal and state sources over the period. We don't have a name for it now, but when we did a retrospective analysis of last plans, we found that a certain amount of revenue materialized that we had not expected. Examples would be the Proposition 1B bonds, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And in doing that retrospective analysis over a 15-year period and then carrying that forward, we project about $14 billion in revenues from this anticipated category. As I noted at the outset, the overall financial envelope that we're projecting is $244 billion. This chart really categorizes this money into committed versus discretionary based on the policy that was adopted in April. And as you can see, about $68 billion is deemed discretionary, or about 28% of the revenues. That brings me to the one action item that's part of this presentation, is that we are proposing just very minor revisions to the committed policy to ensure that the committed policy aligns well with our revenue forecasts. So we are asking that you approve some changes to resolution that you refer to the Commission, some changes to MTC Resolution 4006 that basically include adding the sales tax reauthorizations as committed funding. The base county sales taxes are already committed funding. Also to add a portion of the regional funds of transportation funds for clean air as discretionary, and then show the remaining regional as well as the local funds as committed. And then also to add express lane revenue for statutorily authorized corridors as committed funding source, and then to add land sales and other developer revenues that may be tied to some projects as committed fund sources. So those are our minor revisions that we would like to request. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Are there questions for staff? Yes, Mark.
Some questions, comments, and all of the above, I guess. First of all, I'll start with that one part which talked about assuming $1 total increase over the next 28 years. I've lived in the Bay Area to be 40 years next month, and I think it's safe to say that that the rates have more than quintupled since that time, since I first, maybe octupled, I guess would be the Latin word for 10 times. I don't know if the fare was like 50 cents when it came over or not, but now it's over $5. So I think it's way too low. Personally, I think there will not only need to be, but there will be more than a $1 fare increase between now and 2040. I think that's almost assured. So I think that's off on that one. The looking back at the one chart where it talks about going from 218 to 214, and if you look at how those increases of $26 billion is taking place, over 82% of that is coming out of the local batch, which then gets me to the adding the county sales tax reauthorization as committed fund source, which, you know, I guess would make sense if it wasn't met with the hypocrisy of not having the projects and programs from those various sales tax measures also being committed, which, you know, a few months ago we didn't seem to do that, but now it's commit the funds, but, you know, we'll take the money, but the hell with your ideas and where the projects you go. So you know, I don't mind committing the funding if you're also committing the projects, and to me that's, you know, that's a wide gap there of disconnection. The other part about this is about the county sales tax reauthorization as committed fund sources. What I'm assuming there, when you said that they're all going to expire, is that they would all just expire and be reauthorized at the same level. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the assumption currently.
Well, again, I think that, and again, it hasn't, you know, but I think we need to keep ourselves open for the possibility, at least in one county's standpoint, meaning my own, that we would indeed, I think, be going above that level, not merely reauthorizing, but expanding. So again, I'm just throwing that out there. It's another way to commit our local funds, but not our local projects, I guess. Although I think, again, there's going to have to be we have to come to reckoning with that concept if we're going to be committing these funds. Really speaking to my peers here, not so much the audience or the staff, but that needs to be, I think, kept. And so that's what I have, Mr. Chair, on that.
Okay. Scott, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I tend to agree with Commissioner Green. You know, one of the things that national region, one of the things that where I'm back east anyways, I always talk to them about how there should be a little extra juice for the fact that we're, you know, bringing a lot of money to a lot of local money to the table through these half-cent sales tax. And you know, I would think that if we're going to be committing these funding, that there needs to be a little juice to those counties that do have the half-cent sales taxes. We know not all counties in the 9 Bay Area County region has that. And as far as just making the blanket statement about committing the funding, that is a problem for me because, as Mark talked about, some of these projects won't be well liked by MTC. So I think that it would be okay to show this funding committed to those that maybe the projects that are in the plan, but just to say for Alameda County, $110 million every year is going to be committed as part of the plan. I don't think that's fair. I really don't. I don't think it's right. And I think that there should be a little juice for our good behavior in coming back.
Chairman, could I respond? Because I'm a little bit puzzled by the comment. I got the irony from Commissioner Green, but what we mean by committed funding is that when a county passes a sales tax, the voters lock up the money for those projects, and there's nothing we or anybody else can do to change that. That's what we mean by committed funding. Now, a committed project is one. It may be funded by a local sales tax, but it's also got full funding. And I think the debate we had with the committed projects was many projects with committed funding from a sales tax are seriously underfunded in terms of the total cost. And I think the majority of the commission felt that those projects should therefore be uncommitted. Now, if the alternative is to say that all of the sales tax money is uncommitted money, I don't think that's the direction we want to head. So I was just a little bit at a loss to figure out what to do in response. It would seem to me having the money committed is at least what you'd want. I know you might want more commitment than that, but if we don't commit the money, then that money theoretically is up for grabs. Well, that's why I didn't understand the comment. The proposal...
You know what, this Alameda County, for example, in better times, I don't know exactly what our house and sales tax measure's doing right now, but was $110 million a year. I'm sure it's lost some value and power. What? 100. I mean, that's Alameda County's money. That's not MTC's money.
Oh, we agree.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what
I don't personally care if MTC commits it or not, because that's Alameda County's money.
Well, we have to do something with it, though. It's in the plan.
Yes, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, to that point, though, I don't understand what MTC has to do with locally generated sales tax money.
Every bit of money in the Bay Area that's spent on transportation has to be accounted for in our plan. There's the reason we have the, yes, that's federal law.
We don't understand.
Okay, well, that's what I'm trying to explain. We have put together this committed distinction to distinguish the fact that even though the money is in the plan, there are certain pots of money that we don't have a say over, that we don't control. County sales taxes are one, the local gas tax subventions are another. There are quite a few. Local fares. We don't decide what fares are on the transit system. So we have to account for the money, and the way we account for that kind of money is by calling it committed. So we put it in the plan, but we lock it up as soon as we put it in. Now, the other money, and the money that you argue over, is the discretionary money, where there is, that money also has to be in the plan, but that money is money that you can decide about, putting it on one thing versus another.
And that's where if you have a project in your local sales tax measure that's not funded, it's underfunded, that's the money that has to be competed for, and that's what we're talking about.
But the money that is in the plan for that project from the sales tax does not have to be competed
That's
for.
correct.
Correct.
And that point I'm making, Steve, is that is a shortfall is what's in question. So.
Right.
Jim?
Yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, and I agree with what Steve is saying. We need to count all of the money available in the Bay Area because we have a giant list of projects that includes everybody's projects from around the Bay Area. So we have to have all the fund sources for those. I think that's great. And the county money is committed. We'll compete for the discretionary to finish the funding on those. But one thing that you said that I'm concerned about, I think you said in your assumptions that all of the existing sales taxes for transportation are assumed to roll over at the same rate. Okay, I agree with Mark. I think they're probably, most of them are going to go up. But I would think, now maybe I'm overly optimistic, but I would think that those counties that do not have successful sales tax measures yet, over this period of time, would eventually get there. Now, maybe that's too much to assume, but I'd like to think that those that haven't made it yet would wind up being there because the money's just going to be too short.
Thank you for the optimism. I appreciate that support.
I'll come vote for you if you want me to, Jim.
You can help us with the campaign. I just put you down on the campaign.
That works. That works. Anyway, I think we should assume at least at some level the others will come on board, but maybe that's unrealistic.
I think this is where we have to be cautious in terms of sort of the federal guidance that we have. If, for example, a county sales tax exists, and in several cases in the region, they've actually been reauthorized already, so we can show a demonstrated track record in terms of the likelihood that it will be available in the future. However, for some counties that have actually tried to pass sales taxes and actually have a track record of not passing sales taxes, then it's a little harder for us to do that and still sort of be consistent with sort of the federal guidance that we're trying to follow in terms of our financial forecast. So that's why we didn't propose that at this time.
Okay. Questions on this item?
Just to clarify then, so what I'm hearing is that our locally passed sales taxes, that we let our voters know what they're buying with those dollars, are not being counted as money that MTC can use to spend on things. It's just an accounting issue to identify all of the different monies in the Bay Area that are available for transit, but that those are locked up and protected for the local.
Correct, Supervisor. Now, the reason that we had an additional conversation, though, is it is fairly common for large capital projects in those measures not to be fully funded by the measure itself, like your 101. That has to go get other money. And a lot of that other money is discretionary. So we end up arguing about the project anyway. We just don't argue about the portion of the project that's funded with local money.
Okay,
Jim?
Yes. So, wait, hang on, guys, at this end. I want to take Tom and then Dave, and then I'll come back to you.
Hi, Tom Azambrado, HUD Rep. On slide 7, in 2013, we're starting off at about $3.50 a gallon. For now, are we looking at a reduction of cost over the next few years? And then 2020, we have a dramatic change of consumption starting to go up. And I couldn't figure out what's causing that. And then from 2020 to 2040, we're showing gas prices at about 3.3% inflation, where we're projecting inflation at 2.2. My comment on this is I thought we were really trying to see that fuel prices was one way to reduce consumption and get people into estimates of pricing. I'm concerned that, and then that might be accurate, but that actually I think takes away a big strategy we've been using. The primary question really isn't so much the 3.5. Why the dramatic change from a reduction of consumption to
And I think it has to do with sort of the implementation of, think of the Pavley standard, and after that is fully implemented, that consumption would start to grow a little bit again in a minor growth. So I probably need to get more information to you, but that's sort of that's sort of the short version of why
My
consumption
sense of
grows.
it, Commissioner, is that steep decline is as the Pavley fleet is being rolled in, right? And as soon as it's rolled in and turned over, then it's back to normal where fuel consumption rises. But Pavley should have a very dramatic reduction.
So I didn't realize that.
That's what I would assume by looking at the chart, yeah.
That would make sense.
Well, again, this is a forecast. We took it from the Department of Energy. We took a fairly aggressive forecast from them, not one of their lower ones. This isn't a desire of us one way or the other. This is what we think will happen. These are very significant increases in price in current dollars.
Okay, Dave, and then I'll come back.
This is just a comment, and I certainly don't want to get us off track, but I think part of the issue, you know, semantics, going back to the committee, the thing that we can't document up here is political commitment. And when you look at most of these local sales taxes, I know it's been the experience of San identified, the projects are identified, but the political commitment, not only is there nothing that we can do up here, but it probably will ultimately need to be in the plan, some sort of footnoting or asterisk that just acknowledges that our Measure A sales tax, there's already been 3 or 4 projects that were that keeps moving. We had this system a few years ago, they would be shown presumably funds And it's almost like locally, anything that can be appropriated can be unappropriated. And I just put that out there because you could see the misunderstandings coming in future years where either this room or local operators' meeting chambers are full of people saying, you know, that's shown in the regional plan as committed. What are you doing trying to move it?
Thank you. Scott, and then Mark. Oh,
Yeah,
Sam, I'm sorry. Scott and then Sam.
I guess at the risk of picking the fly out of the pepper here, I wanted to ask Steve, so you have, I think the difference for me is now the committed projects and the committed funds. Okay, they're very different things. But when you have the committed funds, will you show what percentage of that is for committed projects? Or is that like just really wonking it to death and not really needed? Because I know there's probably a lot of projects in the plan that won't have committed funds, right?
Yeah, I think we showed you a version of that when you were having this debate a few meetings ago. Right, they're two separate things. If you want to be a committed project, you need to have 100% committed funds as well.
Yeah, I just think it would be telling to be able to look at this and say, you know, in Alameda County, 30% of the committed funds are going to committed projects, so 70% is not. I just think it would be helpful to see that by county.
Sure, we can certainly provide that.
Okay. Sam?
Thanks, Chair. Not going to build on the reference made by my colleague. Given the fact that 95% of the revenue for the regional plan is really based on bridge tolls and AB 1107 money, I'm really concerned about this assumption, as Mark mentioned, around the $1 increase over 28 years. Why? Why did we pick such a really conservative assumption?
Because any money that we put in that's uncommitted, you're going to fight over. And really, it's about how much of a fight you want to have. Now, look, Commissioner Green is right. Over 28 years, are we going to see more than one bridge toll increase? Of course we are. But I would suspect that the vast majority of those increases, just as we have seen to date, are going to be for the upkeep and maintenance of those bridges. They're not going to create discretionary funding for you all to argue over. So that's what we really mean by saying we think there will be at least one bridge toll increase in the near term, call it Regional Measure 3, that will be revenue free and clear of the bridges that you can spend on other things. And we thought it made sense just to have one discussion about that right now. Now, we could have two of them if you want to make that assumption. It's just how many discussions do you want to have about something that's probably many, many years away? Because ultimately, you got to get one of these on the ballot and vote on it. So that's the reason for the assumption. I think you're right that it's conservative, but I think if we can reach some consensus on what to do with Regional Measure 3, that would be a victory in my book. And we can worry about Regional Measure 4 after we pass Regional Measure 3.
Understood. Thanks.
Mark?
Well, you know, I guess I don't know. I'm not. Perhaps wearing a white shirt makes me look that way, but I'm not generally seen as being conservative. But and I just think that is far too conservative. I mean, if we're really talking about what kind of money we're going to have out there on the table, and I don't mind battles. I mean, that's what I'm elected, and that's what politicians do. They fight, they battle, they scrape. That's you know, if you don't like meetings, you know, get another job. So I just think that's avoidance technique myself. I think we need to have something more realistic in terms of a toll increase than $1 bump over the next nearly 3 decades. I think that's far too conservative, and it's in ways misleading. And as far as the other part, I actually, as I think I stated, actually do not mind the sales tax reauthorizations as committed funds. It was more of a political statement, policy statement for my peers up here to keep in mind that if we're going to do that, we need to give more boost for those projects when they do come in front of us. So, but again, I think the $1 is, I won't be voting for this, but I think the $1 is not even close to what it'll be.
Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on to item B. I'm not going to take action on this till I deal with B and C because of all the speaker cards, and they're all interwoven, and so if we can, Ellen, if you and Joanne can come on up and get ready, and Alex, we'll come back to you as soon as we get done with the next 2 items. Yes.
I just,
Adrian.
on that whole issue around the tolls, Steve, I just had a question for you. You know, when Commissioner Green's talking about that he doesn't think the $1 is realistic, and we know we probably will see more potentially, but when we've gone from, say, 50 cents 20, 30 years ago to $5 or so today, has the majority of that money been used back to retrofitting and repairing and maintenance? Because my understanding was the reason you raise your tolls is for that exact purpose, if you can't meet the obligation. So for us to assume we're going to raise it to use on a lot of other things, it's almost inappropriate.
Well, of the current $5 toll, round numbers, $4 is being spent on the bridges. Most of it to build that big fancy new bridge near Treasure Island. So in terms of discretionary revenue, I wouldn't consider most of that money discretionary. It's being maintained, it's used to maintain the system, just like a transit agency would collect its fares and use it to maintain its system.
Well, that's
now one of those increases, Regional Measure 2, was spent off-system on a bunch of projects, and that's what we have in mind here.
Right. But I guess my concern is I wouldn't want to give people the impression, if we talk about more than that $1, that we're going to somehow, over 28 years, come up with all kinds of money that we're going to be able to spend on other things, and we give a distorted sense of what we have to work with. I mean,
yeah, I do believe, as Commissioner Green said, that there will be more than $1 increase, but
right.
I suspect that quite a few of those dollars, a couple of them may go to replace the Richmond Bridge. Because that's probably the next one in line to be replaced over its lifespan. And that's not something we really, I think, need to have a debate about here.
Right.
And assume that we could somehow spend that money on some other project when it's going to be needed to replace a bridge.
Well, yeah, I think we give the wrong expectation to people is just what my concern about that too.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I agree. I have a concern if you raise it higher than that. You know, the other 2 measures were voter approved, and we don't know what's going to be in that measure. And so if we put the money in here and start programming it prematurely, I think it's really kind of irresponsible. And so I have a concern about that. The point's well taken, but you can't put money in there that you can expect to spend on something else that isn't going to be realistic. With that, I'd like to have Ellen and Joanne, if you could, let's do the workshop summary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ellen Griffin from MTC Legislation and Public Affairs, and with me is Joanna Bullock from ABAG's Planning Section. And we're here to cover the spring public engagement on Plan Bay Area. We're going to summarize what we've heard in response to release of the initial vision scenario in March. We got out into every county in the region to ask people some basic questions about their vision for how the region should grow, the challenges and opportunities we face to create a region that we're proud to turn over to the next generation. Last month, you heard a presentation on a statistically valid telephone poll in conjunction with Plan Bay Area. You've also heard input from local elected officials and planners and so forth. Joanna and I are going to summarize the key messages we heard as part of the workshops and online activities. So your packet today is chock full of information. Attached to the cover memo is a complete list of all of the different meetings that were held. Attachment 2 provides some overall regional tallies for the workshops. And then of particular interest might be attachment 3, which is a snapshot by county of what we heard. And it's a good way for you to compare, you know, what your constituents said in your county versus the overall regional information. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joanna.
Okay, first slide. So to fill the requirements set forth in SB 375, this spring MTC and ABAG developed and implemented an unprecedented regional engagement effort. We utilized a multidimensional approach, included improving some existing tools and adding some new innovative techniques. Immediately following the release of the initial vision scenario March 11th, we commenced briefings with locally elected officials and forums with planning and CMA staffs. A total of 22 meetings were held throughout the region. We embraced new partnerships to leverage our limited funds and to increase public workshop participation. We took advantage of technological tools, including a strong web presence and popular social media such as Facebook and Twitter. Multiple videos were created utilizing and featuring board members and agency experts, and we even received some local cable TV coverage. Next slide. Upon the conclusion of the initial vision scenario briefings for elected officials and forums that some of you attended, we commenced the first series of public engagement meetings and events for the general public. With the assistance of our consultant team, we convened a total of 10 workshops in every county, all of which were very well attended. In addition to general public workshops through small outreach grants, we worked with 14 community-based organizations to engage and get input from communities of concern. Ellen will speak more specifically to this engagement in her comments. The community-based organizations were successful in getting 1,600 surveys completed by door-to-door visits and through a variety of events and festivals. We sought to engage a wide range of residents and interest groups in our workshops. To gauge our success, we asked workshop participants to identify themselves from 8 categories. And as you can see from this slide, the largest self-identified group were community members, followed by government and environmental advocates. Because this is a large region and our resources were limited, we set out to maximize use of technology to expand our outreach in every county. Our efforts yielded pretty successful outcomes. We had 5,400 visits to the You Choose website, 5,700 visits to our One Bay Area website, plus other a nice level of hits to our Facebook, Twitter, and other online news information sites. After the completion of our multi-tiered, multi-dimensional engagement effort, we began the enormous task of reviewing all the data that we collected, identifying key messages, and summarizing it for presentation. This was no small undertaking. The summaries presented to you today represent input and comments from workshops as well as the web and the survey. One message that was clear from the comments is some felt the workshops were biased to support growth. We put forth every effort to capture all the participants' views. We learned last year that a partnership between a community foundation and community-based organizations called Envision Bay Area received grant funding to conduct public outreach for the Sustainable Community Strategy. Upon hearing their decision to conduct public workshops, MTC and ABAC pursued conducting joint workshops, believing leveraging our resources would yield synergistic outcomes. With their grant funding, Envision Bay Area acquired an interactive planning engagement tool called You Choose. This tool allowed participants to identify priorities and see how the priorities are affected by growth choices. One of the purposes of the tool was to enable participants to gain a deeper understanding of the regional planning process and the trade-offs involved in decision-making. The next few slides will summarize the votes on the questions asked in all 10 workshops around the region. Participants were asked to rank 14 growth priorities as seen as this chart. Based on the You Choose voting captured in this process, the 3 leading growth priorities in the region are clean air, lower carbon emissions, and conserving water. In the event participants were not in agreement with the 14 priorities, they were encouraged to write in other priorities. And some of those included economic development, convenient affordable transit, public health, bike and pedestrian-friendly communities, and of course, none of the above. Participants were asked where we should build homes to accommodate our growth. Build homes in our region, or allow for some homes to be built outside of our region, and almost 80% voted to build homes for our growth in our region. After identifying growth priorities, participants were then asked to make a selection from 4 growth patterns. Most urban and more urban received the highest number of votes, with just over 10% opting for business as usual. Participants in community-based organization surveys supported less growth. In an effort to mirror the questions asked of locally elected officials and planning and CMA directors regarding the initial vision scenario, we provided workshop participants with an introduction to the place types. We then asked them to provide their reactions to the overall county growth, to identify places they felt were most appropriate for growth, and to identify places they believed were inappropriate for their county. The support for the place types was mixed, and participants generally supported housing near jobs, more pedestrian and bike-friendly communities, with more resources for infrastructure, schools, and open space. Some of the responses we heard involving place types, including concerns about the accuracy of our growth estimates. In this economy, it's difficult for some to foresee the levels of growth that we've projected. Some responses expressed concern about overall growth, specifically opposition to any growth at all. Other concerns involve displacement, adequate affordable housing, support for the suburbs, and health impacts of infill development.
Tag team here. Now I'm going to, part of the workshop format included a table discussion, and we had 2 card games. And the first card game dealt with transportation infrastructure investments. And I'll just quickly point out some, the top vote getters were, with the playing cards, were funding for the transit with the most effective routes and incentives for locals to encourage transit-oriented development. And then the workshops, that's very consistent with what the poll said as well. The poll had strong support for both of those. The workshops had a little twist in that we heard that it was also important to conserve ag lands and open space. And then bicycle and pedestrian did well in the poll as well as in the workshops. And then up on the slide here, you'll see some, just some of the top line messages. We just heard that a really robust transit system is key to growing in a sustainable fashion. We heard that incentives to locals are important to either develop sustainably or to preserve precious open space. We heard that you need to be flexible about it. There was support, as I said, for bicycle and pedestrian. People really were attracted to the idea that they could walk someplace. And then in economic development was something we heard a lot. We had in this exercise what we called wild cards, or, so it's a chance to just do something other than what we had mentioned. And we heard a lot about the need for incentives for job creation, better access to businesses, streamlined regulations. The second card game was priority policy initiatives. And the number one, it's interesting, the number one choice was other or wild cards. And you know, the next slide will cover some of the key messages, but we heard a lot about the need to consolidate transit fares on these wild cards, as well as there was support for a gas tax to do a number of things. There wasn't like a gas tax for X, it was the whole alphabet. And then there were policies to promote economic development and electric vehicle, including infrastructure. So, let's see. We also heard in the conversation at the tables that while the incentives for employers were, or employer programs are essential, but they preferred incentives as well as requirements. So, and that's also what we heard in the poll too, carrots versus sticks. I mentioned there's support for a gas tax, mixed support for electric vehicles and pricing. When you started sounding people out, we heard that public health issues are an important component of the whole growth equation. And again, transit is key. Keeping it affordable and integrated seemed to be one of the top messages. So as Joanna mentioned, we did have a component to cover Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and that asks us to involve low-income communities and communities of color. We selected through a competitive bid process 14 nonprofit groups to engage residents in low-income communities and communities of color. They in turn reached out to involve some 1,600 people in those communities, and we were in every Bay Area county except Napa. Sorry, Commissioner Todd. We used a variety of techniques, and some first this time we went to a Cinco de Mayo festival in Santa Rosa. We surveyed people at food banks. One of our meetings featured karaoke. We partnered with some media organizations. One is Youth Radio, and they're based here in Oakland, and they ran a commentary. I think it aired on KCBS. We partnered with a Spanish language station up in Santa Rosa, KBBF. So the comments we heard from the CBOs expand public transit options. They were also very supportive of maintaining open spaces, especially parks, playgrounds, and facilities for youth in particular. They're concerned about jobs as well, and they're looking for opportunities to increase jobs. And then they also noted the need to maintain affordable housing for low and middle income communities. Overall concerns. They're concerned about the adverse impact on long-time residents in communities, and they don't want to be pushed out with new development programs. They're concerned about retaining their local character, and they want to retain the diversity. They're concerned about the impacts of growth on, we heard this across the board, not just in low-income communities, but what's the impact of growth on schools, on infrastructure, on crime, recreational amenities, and so forth. So one point that I did want to emphasize towards the end of my presentation here is that we did attract a whole lot of new people who had never been to a transportation or land use workshop before. And so nearly 20% were newbies. So I think that was a good result. And then I'll just quickly close by reminding you where we are in the process. The very next item, you'll be asked to consider some scenarios. And so we're hoping that this presentation will help inform that decision. And then we'll be beginning a technical phase, and in the fall we'll be back out with more public engagement, and you're slated to make a decision possibly next February on a preferred scenario. And this whole process wraps up in 2013. I want to thank all of you who came to workshops. I know it took a lot of time, but it was really important for the public to know that you were there to hear their views. And with that, I'll conclude.
Questions for? Okay, just keep yourself handy. Let's move on to C. This is defining alternative scenarios. Ashley and Ken, are you ready? Going to be another action item that'll come back to us after this presentation. What I'm going to do is after this presentation, I'm going to take all the speakers and they can speak on A, B, and C, and then we'll return to the two action items. So with that, Ken or Ashley?
Good morning, committee members. We're going to be presenting to you, the title is Draft Alternative Scenarios. I think it's important for everyone to understand that these are the concepts based upon the input of this committee, the Regional Advisory Working Group, MTC Policy Committee, ABAG's Regional Planning Committee, et cetera, that would be analyzed by staff leading up to the October release of alternative scenarios. So these are the directions that we're presenting to you as for potential scenarios. SB 375 has two key requirements, and I think part of what staff has attempted to do with these scenario concepts is to address both of these in a way that would move the region forward and really look at some of the challenges the region has, some of which were identified in the last presentation, and would attempt to address them moving forward. The first is that we analyze how the region can satisfy its considerable housing demand for projected population across all income categories, and also to come up with a forecasted development pattern for the region that's supported by the transportation system that reduces greenhouse gas emissions and is also based upon the reality of what we can identify right now for funding, for infrastructure, for capacity, and so on. So given what we've learned from current regional plans, that's our most recent regional forecast and the initial vision scenario that was released back in March. There are a number of considerations. Can we achieve a realistic land use pattern that reaches our adopted performance targets? Can we afford the transportation improvements to support the scenario? What difference might employment distribution make? We've had a lot of commentary, as was suggested, relative to the public workshops around economic development, job growth, and so forth. That's not an issue we've taken a look at in a fine-grained way at the regional planning level to date, and we're proposing that we do that in these scenario concepts. What new resources or policies need to be considered to help us reach our targets? And can we develop distinct alternative scenarios to help us address all of these questions? So the framework that we're proposing has a number of key components. One is that we strive to achieve all adopted performance targets with all of the concepts, that we really take a close look at resource constraints on housing production and infrastructure funding, that we isolate the impacts of different combinations of land use growth patterns, transportation improvements, and supportive policies. So they're being presented to you as concepts, but we're going to want to isolate some of the individual variables to see what the effects of different components are as we move forward. That we identify the job, population, and housing growth patterns that can reduce auto trip lengths, as well as improve proximity to the transportation network. So it's not just about getting people on transit, it's also their proximity to what they need to do in their day-to-day activities, in their lives. That we assess against social equity measures. There are a couple key performance targets that you adopted for the entire plan that are specific to equity. There's also a suite of equity measures that have been adopted. That analysis would move forward for all of the alternative scenarios. So part of what we would be presenting to you in October is detail on how these scenarios, how each of them performed relative to those measures, and those are informed by work of the SCS Equity Subcommittee. We would do all that to inform the selection of a preferred scenario that best meets the region's goals, complies with SB 375, and also the federal requirements that include that what is adopted by MTC and ABAG be connected to reality. It can't simply be a vision that we think would be a great idea if it can't be implemented. So last month we heard from you a number of key comments that we'll say back to you, and hopefully we got this right, that we take a realistic, pragmatic approach when defining the scenarios, that we scrutinize the assumptions in the housing and jobs forecasts, given the Great Recession, given the relatively tepid growth in this region around jobs for the last couple of decades and so forth, that we really take a good look at what the control totals are, that we organize our thinking into 3 areas. What are the things that we can control? And I think the we is not just MTC and ABAG, but this region as a whole. What can regional agencies, local jurisdictions, CMAs, and other entities control? What are the things that are beyond our control? And what would it take to really make some change in the right direction through the SCS? We also heard relative to employment distribution that generally speaking, that seems to be a good idea to take a closer look at that, but given our tax structure, our economic system and so forth, there are limits in terms of how much jobs could be moved, and that we need to be aware of that as we do that analysis. And finally, that assuming major roadway and transit expansions could be funded, funding levels is probably a stretch given what we know right now in terms of likely transit and transportation funding going forward, so we need to be aware of that. So we have 5 options on the land use end, and I think it's important to think about the way we're presenting this in terms of we're presenting the land use options first, followed by some transportation options beyond that. And that's really based upon what SB 375 is geared to do, which is to create a land use pattern for the region based upon the consensus and a lot of analysis, and then match transportation policies and funding that would support that scenario. So the first option, number 1, you've heard a lot about. That's the initial vision scenario. It was released back in March. In that scenario, 70% of the growth would be in priority development areas or growth opportunity areas. The employment allocation was based upon the forecast, so with that scenario we did not look in any detail at employment location. That's something we would do in the other scenarios moving forward. We met the housing target, but we did not meet the greenhouse gas target. And on that last piece relative to the greenhouse gas target, it's important to note we didn't include employment in a detailed way. We did bump up the headways for transit and transportation, transit headways considerably, but there weren't a lot of new projects. And we didn't include some of the policies that Ashley will talk about shortly. Number 2, core concentration. would really look at the distribution of housing and employment and try to determine how this region could move forward in a sustainable way based upon land use first. If we had a land use pattern that achieved our targets, not just greenhouse gas, but the housing target as well, what would that look like? We would then take that information, and it would likely call for some increased densities in, for example, priority development areas that are now very well served by transit based upon our existing system, that are close to jobs, that if they were developed at a somewhat higher density, so it's probably in some of our cities, somewhat higher buildings, a somewhat different development pattern than is currently represented in the initial vision scenario for some of these areas. What does that look like? What does it mean in terms of performance targets? What does it mean in terms of equity? All of the analysis that we'll be doing. Number 3, locally defined development pattern, is essentially based upon the really significant input we're receiving on the initial vision scenario from local jurisdictions. And we're hearing a range. There are some jurisdictions who think the distribution relative to their jurisdiction is fine. There are quite a few that think it's high, but it might be attainable if there were resources in place to build the neighborhoods, if there were adequate transit and so forth. And there are some who think it's too high. There are actually a few who think it's too low, which was surprising to me. So we'll be incorporating that input into number 3. With that, it's possible that the housing target will not be met. We met it in the initial vision scenario. It's possible we would not meet the housing target. So we would be looking at other measures to achieve the greenhouse gas target for number 3 if we don't meet it through the housing target. Number 4, constrained core concentration, essentially looks at number 2. If we are able to come up with a land use pattern that really reflects a sustainable approach to growth for the region, where we achieve not just the greenhouse gas target, but we perform well on some of the other performance measures, this scenario looks at what would it take to do so and what are the shortfalls. For example, on the housing end, we've estimated that roughly 50% of the projected housing need for the regional housing target would require some kind of subsidy. We'd be looking at what subsidies could be identified, what inclusionary policies existing in existing communities and what that might produce in terms of affordable housing, the shortfalls for neighborhood infrastructure, for transit, and so forth. That would be incorporated, and because of that, once those constraints are incorporated, it's possible that we would not be able to achieve the housing target, although we would try to push it as far as we possibly could, being connected to reality. And finally, number 5, Outer Bay Area growth, still would assume that much of the growth would occur within the region's more urban communities, within those priority development areas and growth opportunity areas in those communities. But it would also take a look at outer parts of the region that have seen considerable housing growth in recent years. We think it's possible that with number 5, when constraints are incorporated, that we might not be able to achieve the housing target with number 5. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ashley.
So on the transportation side, we have identified 3 different transportation options. The first transportation option mirrors the Transportation 2035 investment strategy. And as you may recall, here under the Transportation 2035 plan, we devoted 80% of the $218 billion budget towards maintaining and operating the existing system. This follows suits with the Commission's longstanding fix-it-first policy, where we basically make good on the investments that we put in over the past many decades and continue to keep our existing infrastructure in a state of good repair. This basically left 20% of that budget to go towards other infrastructure needs. And here we put 14% of that towards transit expansion, which is largely our Resolution 3434 Regional Transit Expansion Program, 3% towards road expansions, which includes some highway improvements as well as interchange improvements, and 2% towards bicycle, pedestrian, and other infrastructure needs. So the first transportation option really is following in line with how we invested the $218 billion from the last plan. The second transportation option is different. Instead of having an 80% of our available funding directed to maintenance, we increased this by 5%. So we're looking here at increasing our maintenance emphasis from 80% in T 2030 and Transportation 2035 to 85% under the core transit capacity network. This leaves about 15% to devote to other infrastructure needs. And under the core transit capacity network, we would like to direct that monies towards transit core improvements in their inner bay. We would be improving commuter rail, express bus, and bus rapid transit for the most part, and also supporting local transit services. We would also allocate more of that funding towards roadway improvements, and this would be implementation of the 500-mile backbone regional express lane network, as well as continued implementation of the Freeway Performance Initiative. We would continue to prioritize and invest in bicycle and pedestrian improvements, but we would prioritize that funding towards bike and pedestrian improvements within the core concentration scenario that core concentration land use development pattern that Ken described. The fifth, and I'll explain the numbering system in a second, but the next one is the, or let me do it, let me do it now. So 3, 4, and 5 is really 1, 2, and 3 in terms of the number of transportation options, but they really, the 3 transportation options here marry with the number 3, 4, and 5 land use development pattern. And you'll see that later, and it'll be more apparent when I show you the graphics. So 3, 4, and 5 on land use matches up to 3, 4, and 5 on transportation. Okay, so with that clarification, and we try to throw some things your way to keep you on your toes. The third transportation option is called the expanded network. And here it's really a stark contrast to what we saw in terms of the investment strategy for the core transit capacity network. So under the expanded network, we would decrease the amount of maintenance funding the amount of funding that would go towards maintaining the existing system, going from 80% in the Transportation 2035 and reducing that by 10%, assuming that we would direct 70% of our budget towards the Fix It First policy. This basically leaves about 30% towards other infrastructure needs. And here we would allocate that 30% more towards roadway improvements. And this could involve the full implementation of the Regional Express Lane Network, as well as the full implementation of the Freeway Performance Initiative. We would also allocate funds towards transit improvements, but this would be more transit improvements along the line of trunk line transit expansions beyond what we've already identified in Resolution 3434. We would again continue to support bicycle and pedestrian improvements within our region, but we would prioritize that funding towards supporting improvements that would support bike and pedestrian activities out in the outer bay area, outer parts of the region. So in addition to the land use options and the infrastructure options, we do also have this third set of options, which is called policy initiatives. And we offer a suite of options here. The first one is transportation demand management strategies. This includes telework options, commuter benefits, and ride-sharing services, and other TDM types of strategies. We would also look towards parking pricing. And parking pricing here is emphasizing local implementation of potentially higher parking charges during peak periods, and perhaps even employer parking cash-out programs. We would also pursue climate initiative types of strategies, such as smart driving, where we have driver education to really inform how we could drive better so that we could save on fuels and reduce emissions from our tailpipes. We would support the electric vehicle rollout in terms of putting more of our monies towards electric vehicles as well as public charging systems. And we would have to do this beyond what the Air Resources Board is assuming as part of the AB 32 scoping plan. We would also continue to support programs like Safe Routes to School, where we're trying to get more kids and parents to ride or bike to school and make infrastructure improvements that would support that activity. We would also consider other strategies that are to be determined in order to really think about all the different strategies that may help us to get greenhouse gas emission reductions. And it's possible through the various scenarios that I'll be presenting in 2 seconds that instead of trying to dream up different strategies, we could potentially just scale up the transportation demand management strategy or the parking pricing strategy or the climate initiative strategies. So what you see here is we have 2 slides with staff is proposing 5 scenarios that are constructed based on a mixing and matching of the land use options, the infrastructure options, and the policy initiative options. The first 2 scenarios here do 2 things. They attempt to meet, actually, let me take a half step back. All 5 scenarios that you will be seeing are designed to meet the 15% greenhouse gas emission reduction target. The 2 scenarios that you see on this slide are aimed at meeting the housing target, although the first one, the initial vision scenario, as you know, we were able to meet the housing target by design, but we were not able to fully reach the greenhouse gas emission target. We were shy by about 3%, if I remember correctly. So the second scenario, so the first scenario is our initial vision scenario that was married up with the Transportation 2035 network. We've already done an evaluation of that scenario. And we're putting it on the table here for illustrative purposes as well as comparative purposes as we go through the evaluations of the other 4 scenarios. The second scenario here is what we're calling the dual core scenario, where we have a core concentrated land use development pattern that is matched up with a core transit capacity network. And here, what we're looking to do, and we're trying to illustrate this graphically, but we're really looking to design a land use pattern that may help us reach our 15% target with just land use development patterns alone. The infrastructure and the policy initiatives may help us to potentially exceed our greenhouse gas emission reduction. These next 3 scenarios all again try to achieve our 15% greenhouse gas emission reduction target, but they may or may not help us to achieve our housing target as well as the other 8 performance targets. But we would strive to maximize our achievement of all the targets through certainly these 3, but all the 5 scenarios that we are evaluating. So the third scenario here is the locally defined land use pattern that is matched up with the Transportation 2035 network. And we see a need for using all 3 levers to help us to reach our targets. We would have a land use development pattern matched up with a mix of infrastructure and policy initiatives to get at the 15%. The fourth scenario is what we're calling our constrained core concentration land use development pattern matched up with the core transit capacity network. And here we may be able to do a little bit more with land use, and we would push hard on both infrastructure and policy initiatives to get us at the 15% reduction. The fifth scenario is what we're calling the Outer Bay growth development pattern matched up with an expanded network. And here we don't have an expectation that we can push land use far enough, so we would have a much heavier reliance on infrastructure and policies to get us at target achievement. I do want to mention that we presented this presentation to your policy, MTC's Policy Advisory Council this Wednesday, and we did have a very good discussion with the policy advisory members. The representatives of the Policy Advisory Council could not be here today, so I wanted to report that they did want to see they had two key policy comments that they wanted me to share with you. One is that they would like to they would really like to see equity goals addressed in all 5 scenarios. And secondly, they would like to have you consider adding a 6th scenario that maximizes equity. And we didn't have any details on what that means, but they did want to share those 2 comments. And I just also wanted to point out that you did receive 3 comment letters, one from Transform, Greenbelt, and Public Advocates with other stakeholders, asking you to do something along those same lines, plus additional comments. So to close, here's our timeline. I love going through this part. It shows progress, at least on paper. We have been working really hard over the past many months to really vet some ideas and brainstorm with our advisory groups and you all with regards to the alternative scenarios. What we're hoping to do today is to receive additional comments from you and the public about the scenarios, but we're really hoping to get some committee action on the scenarios so that staff can really begin the technical work. If we can start that technical work in July, we would certainly appreciate that time. We would be looking to do the technical work between July, August, September, and come out with results in October that we could share with you and the public. October would be the milestone date for initiating the 2nd round of public engagement, public and agency engagement on the scenarios. Our ultimate aim is to identify a preferred scenario, which would likely be a hybrid scenario out of the 5 scenarios that are evaluated. We would like to identify the preferred scenario in early 2012, and then have the MTC and ABAG board adopt that preferred scenario in February 2012. This would allow us to then proceed with the rest of 2012 with the technical analysis, which includes preparing the environmental impact report, preparing the transportation conformity analysis to demonstrate our plan complies with federal air quality planning regs, and conducting an equity analysis and a slew of other technical analysis. The ultimate finish line, if you will, or the ultimate game here is we would like to have a final plan adopted by the MTC and ABAG boards in spring of 2013. With that, Ken and I close, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay, and Ashley, your goal today is for us to adopt these defining alternative scenarios so you can then do the analysis?
Yes, so we're presenting alternative scenario concepts to you today. We would certainly like your input and approval of those concepts so that we can begin the actual technical analysis.
Okay. If committee members can hold their questions, I want to go through the speaker cards. We have a large number of speaker cards. I'd really appreciate if you could make your comments in 1 minute. If you need 2 minutes, let me know when you come up to the podium. And with that, we will have someone timing. When you hear the beep on her timer, that means please wrap it up. And if we don't get through this efficiently, you'll probably be talking to one person, me. And so...
I'll hang with you, Mr.
All right,
Chair.
there'll be a couple of us. With that, Mimi Steele, and then Dave Smith, and then Sean Ackley. So if you guys could queue up, I'd really appreciate it.
Good morning. My name is Mimi Steele. I live in Castro Valley. I'm a property owner and a taxpayer. I do need 2 minutes, I think. I'd like to focus on the One Bay Area visioning process and the partners in that process: Silicon Valley Community Association, Greenbelt Alliance, Calthorpe Associates, and Transform California. I'm going to start with Transform California. Their focus is to build diverse coalitions. This process was not inclusive. They did not have a diverse coalition of people participating in it. There were no members from the American Automobile Association, for example, no members from the Realtor Association, no neighborhood associations, no taxpayer associations. The second aspect of Transform is that they're providing a regional platform of coalition members. If you go to their website, there are over 100 members of that coalition, and all of those are unions, bikes, and walking people. So there is nothing that represents my point of view. The bottom line is this whole process, if you'll pardon the pun, threw a lot of people under the bus. What I am requesting is a complete moratorium on any further activities of the One Bay Area Visioning section. Under California Public Records Act, I'm asking for a full accounting of the funding and an audit of the process. Back to one of your associates on this, Calthorpe Associates. They designed the visioning scenario. They stand to benefit from the visioning scenario if you implement these high-density housing projects. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you. Dave Smith, Sean, and then Newell Arnerich.
I'm Dave Smith. I'm also a taxpayer and a concerned citizen, and I'm very, very appalled at this so-called visioning. There was only one vision that was very clear, and that was their vision. Yeah, that was evident by the choices that we were given and asked to agree on. The setup of the study, I think, is grossly flawed. The assumptions that are made were way out there. I do not think they are reality-based at all. There was no business input into this visioning plan. There was no economic data in on this this visioning plan. I think there was no data in there that showed that crime rates are lower when you have less dense housing. Okay, there was no data there that showed that transportation costs for vehicles is just as low as it would be for public transportation. Greenhouse gases, just as much produced by public transportation as private vehicles. None of this information was brought out. So it was very, very clear that this visioning process, we were being driven to their conclusions that they wanted to have. A few other points here. We were talking about taxes there. A lot of you people are assuming that the voters are actually going to vote for these bond measures. Okay, you're counting on that revenue. I think the people of the state of California have voiced in a number of scenarios here, we do not want higher taxes. Okay, the voters just passed a tax initiative this last go-round. I think that sends a pretty clear vision. And what's happening in Sacramento is we have our heavily progressive Democratic legislature there trying to get around the people's will and spend money on this stuff.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dave. Sean, and then Newell, and after Newell is Leha Phelps.
Thank you so much. I'm here today to speak about local Agenda 21, or what we call the One Bay Area Plan. How many of us don't enjoy clean air, clean streets, and clean oceans? How about clean food free of pesticides, preservatives, and artificial colors? But we're here today holding meetings on One Bay Area on sustainability and how we're going to restructure our society. What we should really be asking ourselves is just exactly what are we doing, whether we should be implementing these protocols and proposals, are we asking the right questions, and more importantly, on where do these plans come from? Question 1, is this a predetermined plan in which we need to reach some kind of consensus? Question 2, what implications does the Ninth Circuit Court stall of AB 32, which is the primary framework for SB 375, have towards the One Bay Area plans? Just exactly what does the United Nations have planned for us, or are they doing the good of the people, or perhaps there are a bunch of non-governmental agencies which would like to see profit from all these actions taken. These action organizations range from the National Education Association to UNESCO to UNCED, the World Wildlife Fund, ICLEI, the World Conservation Bank, the IPCC, and the IMF, among others. The Agenda 21 directive handed down in 1992 at the Rio Summit is at the heart of all the global to local action plans being set up throughout the country. If this information is new to you, it's also new to me as well, as of a year ago. Being practical people, should we not be concerned with replacing our combustion engines with something like zero pollution compressed air systems, truly electric systems, non-hybrid, or maybe even water? These systems have been around in one form or another since the late 1800s. What does this all have to do with sustainability? In essence, it's about money, power, and control. If they can scare you, they can tax you, and then they can control you. If they can get you to fear global warming or climate change with scientific information that normal citizens don't even have the time to research, then what is it to stop them every level, all the way down to your local communities and other cities? It's just that's much more profit for them and ultimately more control.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Newell, Arnerich, and then Leha Phelps after.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. My name is Newell Einerich. I've been around in politics since I had a lot of hair and it was brown. And I remember there are some things we've done when we were negotiating a contract and my mustache was brown, and by the time we were done negotiating it, it was gray. And that just shows you how long sometimes it takes to do the right thing. I'm also the chair of the Tri-Valley Transportation Commission. I'm a member of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. I'm a transportation junkie. I am also an architect and a planner and passionate about transportation and sustainable communities. Today I'm here representing Contra Costa Transportation Authority to share with you 3 things that we agree with you and have had some positive responses. But most importantly, to leave with you one very serious concern that we have that I know most of you, particularly the electeds here, share our similar concern. And I'd just like to address the responses that we received from, we wrote a letter on April 26th, and on May 16th we received a letter regarding our comments on the initial vision scenario. With regard to your positive responses, we appreciate 3 things. MTC and ABAG's commitment to reconsider and further analyze the current employment forecast in light of the continued downturn and recent census data for 2010. And secondly, that one of the alternative scenarios being considered would increase employment in housing-rich areas, and we'll explore adding regional employment centers in those areas. And thirdly, your willingness to evaluate a more balanced transportation investment program, as I think my friend Scott was talking about earlier. We look forward to working with you in partnership as the process moves forward into the next phase of the alternative scenario development. Your letter, however, was silent on our request that you assume reasonable levels of future housing jobs and growth. We understand the reasons for wanting to explore the effects of balancing jobs and employment and employed residents.
Wrap up.
Yeah, I've got 3 sentences. To explore balancing of jobs and employed residents throughout the region. We appreciate the robust discussion ensued since the IVS was first released March 11th. But for reasons enumerated in our letter and in our previous comments, and as echoed by a number of the CMAs and heard en masse from local jurisdictions, we find that the IVS housing forecast unrealistic and unachievable. Moreover, MTC and the ABAG analysis shows that even with increased transit frequency and completion of the backbone of the the hot lanes, the IVS would not achieve greenhouse gas reductions.
No, you have to wrap up.
Okay, I appreciate what we're asking for is on this alternative scenario that's being stop this.
Okay.
It has crept into this. I'm going to formally send you this on Thursday morning under our board signature. Thank you for your consideration.
Leah? After Leah, I think it looks like it looks like Krista Martin. So that name, please follow. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Alia Phelps, and I'm the chair of ACE, Writers for Transit Justice. And we signed on to the letter that I'm sure all of you received. We're a large group of about 2,500 bus riders who are ready to stand up for better bus service. We are here because we are not being served equitably. We need more time for these decisions, and we need you to include an additional scenario, which is the equity, environment, and job scenario, and all options should maximize social equity. No funding gaps, don't give shortfalls, and fully fund proposals to get to SCS levels of density. Thank you.
Thank you for being brief. You get a gold star. Heather Withingham. Heather, is there a Krista Martin? Okay, you're up.
I'm Heather, actually, it's Whittington.
Heather, let the lady behind you speak, and then you follow her. Krista, is it Krista Martin?
Christina.
Oh, Christina, your penmanship is terrible.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
No gold star for her.
I'll keep it short then, okay?
Yes, please.
I'm a young mother, I'm a taxpayer, and I'm a citizen in this republic. And I'm here over the lack of authentic community involvement on this issue. We as citizens have the right to be listened to and heard. We should not be insulted or have meetings that are pretend meetings that don't address our concerns or our issues. We live in a republic, and we should follow the principles for which we are founded on. And as a young mother, I am deeply concerned about these issues. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Very good. Good comments. Heather, you're up now, Heather. And after Heather is Louis Murdoch.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the workshop participation. There were 10 workshops held in the Bay Area. There were only 817 participants, not all of whom participated or voted fully. In my county where I live, portions of the workshop weren't even completed. So basically, out of a population of 6.9 million of the Bay Area, only 817 residents participated in this workshop. Therefore, I do not think it was a success, and I don't think it accurately reflects what the people of the Bay Area really want.
Thank you, Heather. Louise? Lois, I'm sorry, and I knew that.
My name is Lois Murdoch. Sustainable development is a term that came from Agenda 21, which is put out by the United Nations. ICLEI is a part of, or a branch of, Agenda 21 for the purpose of implementing sustainable development across the nation and around the world. It is to enslave the world to socialist organization and control. The purposes of Agenda 21 are population control property, private property included, controlling and taking away our freedom, and moving us into one world government, stopping urban sprawl, eliminating private transportation, and to have a high-speed rail to eliminate the need for fuel consumption. I want you to consider the unintended consequences of getting into bed with these central planners that use federal dollars to entice us into a global system. To what extent does local autonomy of the individual citizenry run the risk of being comprised or undermined by a non-governmental agency over which we as citizens have a final say? I believe this is a republic, and we should be able to vote on something this important. The Declaration of Independence. You get away from this document, you get away from the founding of this nation. We have inalienable rights. One of them is called life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This means the free use of your property and the rights of men to be free to decide for themselves. The decisions that I think should guide our decisions should be, if it is coercive, we're out. America is not about coercion. If it is about centralized authority, we're out. We are American citizens and should behave like American citizens and not international citizens. I believe the ICLEI vision is incompatible with the rights and freedoms of our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Pam, it's Pam F. and Heather G. Pam?
Hi, my name's Pam Farley, and I have a great idea for raising funds. If you want to collect a lot of money in the Bay Area, start collecting a fee when people leave California, because that's what's going to happen if you start putting all this planning into effect. There was so much talk about sustainability during the One Bay Area planning process, but no discussion of the sustainability of spending, the spending binge that is going on in California and the Bay Area. Some questions I would like answered regarding the One Bay Area visioning process are, what did this visioning process cost? Where did the money come from? And how much more money is going to be spent on a vision that most people don't want? Instead of ABAG and MTC conspiring to spend more money on a planning vision that gives no thought to job creation, they might be better off spending their time and effort on plans that help bring jobs back to California. This visioning process is being used to build a completely fraudulent consensus for a regional plan that transfers power away from our elected officials to ABAG and MTC. Thank you.
Heather G.
The One Bay Area visioning process was and is not fair, honest process. It's a process that gives the illusion of public input when in fact there was a predetermined outcome. The focus was $200 billion on mass transit that less than 3% of our population currently uses. And in order to justify that, we need to build stack and pack housing around it. At those meetings, never once did they talk about how much it was going to cost. So as participants, we had no idea what we were actually voting on. Their job and population growth numbers were grossly inflated, and cities have specifically spoke out about that. Pleasant Hill, even Berkeley has said that the population housing numbers are overstated. Some of the One Bay Area staffers, people never even talked to the staffers at the city planning offices about this information. We were given vague questions like, do you want to conserve open space? Well, we asked, what is open space? And we were told that open space is anything that's undeveloped. Well, I have a problem with that. Undeveloped space can be someone's private property. We have no rights to dictate how someone should use their private property. When we questioned them, they simply said, it's whatever you want it to be, just vote, we need to move on. I don't support this. I think there were no place types also for single-family residences. It was just a farce. I think that this whole process needs to be scrapped. I second Ms. Steele's suggestions, and I think we should stop this whole process.
Thank you, Heather. Now, before I move on to the rest of the cards, that was all the cards that had 3A in them, and so at this time I want to bring back to the committee either a motion or further discussion on the draft financial projection and proposed revision of the committed funds and project policy. And is there further discussion? And Mark or
Second.
Is there a motion to adopt and a second? Is there further discussion on that item? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay, let the record show we have one no. Okay, with that, Steve, on the, never mind, I'll just continue, because these are all so intermingled. Karen Smolovich? All right, Karen? Gabby Miller? Is it Miller? Gabby Miller? And after Gabby, it's Risha Fatahi.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Gabby Miller, and I'm a long-term resident of Alameda County and a taxpayer as well. I'm a member of Genesis, which is a regional organization working for transportation equity at the moment. And one of the things that I'd like to point out is that I support the letter. My organization signed the letter that you received this morning regarding the scenarios, and it has been signed by 20 organizations that are actively working in this area. We're asking for an additional scenario that will maximize the social equity, and none of these seem to be doing that. So I ask you to go back to the drawing board, or have your staff go back to the drawing board and look at the social equity component in this, because it's not maximized here. Thank you.
Thank you. Risha, and then Amber Crabb.
Good morning. Unlike some of this, my name is Parissa Fatehi Weeks, and unlike some of the speakers you've heard from today, we support the Sustainable Communities Strategy process. We actually think it can lead to a real improvement in the quality of life in the Bay Area, and have been trying to follow the process and really understand what kinds of decisions have been made so far. And with that, just want to make a few comments that although we know staff has worked very hard, the suite of scenarios that you're being asked to vote on this morning is not complete. And I just simply want to lift up the recommendation of the advisory groups that you yourself have created to give you some advice on this process. And the Policy Advisory Council, as well as the SCS RTP Equity Working Group that have been looking at this just yesterday, or actually Wednesday, voted to recommend to you to include an additional scenario and place it on the table for development and analysis that really focuses on social equity, because we think it will actually help meet all of the performance targets you've put on the table. In terms of details, I think Ashley mentioned there weren't a lot of details, and that's because this decision was a little bit fast-moving for these working groups. Their work is ongoing, and they want to really inform the scenarios. So in the letter you received from 20 organizations, there is an attachment that calls the scenario an equity, environment, and job scenario. I'd encourage you to look at that attachment. We've detailed the broad strokes that we think should be developed by staff. And again, just want to thank you for being thoughtful about this, in advance at least, about being thoughtful about this process, because we think it has the potential to really benefit the entire Bay Area. Thanks.
Amber, and then looks like Wafa Abo-Rasht.
Good morning. I'm Amber Crabb. I'm here representing the San Francisco County Transportation Authority. We have a few, it seems like they're probably technical, more technical comments than the previous speakers with respect to the proposed alternative scenarios. First of all, with respect to alternative scenario 5, the transportation network, it seems like MTC staff is proposing looking at extensions to the transit network beyond Resolution 3434. We feel that if that's going to get opened up for the suburban scenario, then it would make sense to also have a regional discussion about urban core transit expansion that would benefit the core strategy network, especially given the additional growth those areas are expected to take. Secondly, one of the policy initiatives up there is parking pricing. We'd also like to see roadway pricing considered on top of that. It's an effective strategy. Thirdly, we would also like to see clarity on how the RENA methodology committee work is being reflected in this process. We'd like to see equity considerations inform the development of these scenarios, not just kind of be applied afterward to see how they perform. We'd also like to make sure that there's some checks and balances as the land use scenarios are being developed. We want to make sure that there's not going to be a regression from the adopted focus principles. So we want to make sure that we're moving forward and not backward, especially with respect to what may come out of the locally defined development pattern. We'd also, MTC has proposed in the core transit capacity network that more funding go toward freeway performance initiative and express lane network. We'd like to see that really minimized and the focus really be put on transportation demand management strategies and transit, which is, in our opinion, more relevant and needed for the core network. And then finally, we don't support, in scenario 5, a reduction in support for transit and local streets and roads operations and maintenance, especially if we're fix it first is a significant principle we want to maintain. Thank you.
Wafa and then Paul Campos.
Good morning. My name is Wafa Abu-Rashid. I am Executive Director of the Bay Area Healthy 880 Communities, and I am part of the Ditch and Dirty Diesel Collaborative. Thank you so much for this presentation. I do believe that the scenarios that have been put before us has been given to us in such a fast pace that I feel like we need to take a step back and really come back and work with organizations such as the SB 375 Coalition. We need to take a step to the point where people's public participation has meanings. Several of the people indicated what is wrong with the scenarios, and I think one of the things that we need to do is find out how do we collaborate together to do something better for including social equity for low-income communities, have economic vitality, and also don't forget about the environmental health issues that we are dealing with on the fence line communities. In all, I would like to echo the predecessors and what they have just spoken about, and bring back the idea that when public participation happens, it's a give and take and not just give it to us and pretend that you've done your job of really doing public participation. Engagement means that you get the comments from the people that are there, as well as the people that are living there. Cities have failed to do this, these kind of public participations, and now I see it on counties, and sometimes I see it on the state level. So we need to go back and really understand what public participation means. Thank you.
After Paul is Marilyn Melander.
Chairman Spearing and members of both committees, my name is Paul Campos. I'm with the BIA of the Bay Area. I'd like to take the 2 minutes, if I might, and first address the workshops. Now, I realize that this is the first time that we have, as a region, gone through the SCS process and the enhanced complexity and the public outreach necessary to conduct that. But I was very troubled by the nature of the workshops, and in particular, the initial decision by ABAG and MTC to partner with groups like Transform and Greenbelt Alliance, and no disrespect to them, but they are stakeholders in this process, just like BIA and just like the Bay Area Council. And just because they have money doesn't mean that it's good public policy to allow them to structure the online tools and run some of these meetings. I think that was a very penny-wise and pound-foolish decision, and it is responsible for a lot of the displeasure that you've heard both today and in other fora about the options that were given in these workshops. And I must say I'm also disappointed that that staff, which received from the full business community quite a bit of concern about the choices that were offered to participants that really had zero opportunity for economic development and jobs on the growth priorities. We expressed our concern and no changes were made. And I think it's very telling that, as staff, I think, correctly and very fairly pointed out today during the workshop, the concerns about jobs and the economy nonetheless emerged as very, very strong concerns, even though they were not listed as official options. With regard to the scenarios, I support moving forward with the 5 identified scenarios. I do have one very strong concern, however, and that is that we are not yet getting into applying the federal reasonableness requirements with respect to land use assumptions, and I worry that we're going to get so far down the road with various different alternatives that by the end we're going to be scrambling to find one that actually passes muster. So I urge that issue to be injected quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Marilyn, and then Azubuike Akaba, I believe.
I've lived in Contra Costa County for 40 years. You know, if I was sitting up there and was one of you, the most important thing I would want to hear is what the public has to say. You're a regional government entity, which means you are farther away from the public than even local government is. So I'm really sad to see all these empty chairs. I noticed my own District 1 supervisor got up and left. So that's really sad. I attended 2 of the planned Bay Area forums, the ones for Concord and Berkeley. I believe these meetings should have been run according to the Brown Act. Questions from the public were definitely discouraged. Why are so-called environmental groups and a nonprofit from Silicon Valley running these forums? The majority of the people there were Caucasian, middle-aged, use automobiles as their main mode of transportation, and own their own homes. It's amazing to me that the top vote-getters were housing close to jobs. Many of those who attended would be reaching retirement age soon, so that doesn't make any sense. The word sustainable was used frequently, as was vision this, vision that. It was all very vague, not a good thing for a regional government agency that has the power over our tax dollars and to tell us how they will be used for housing and transportation. I've heard this young lady here say you propose using our tax dollars to build bike lanes, mass transit express lanes, and public charging systems. Why not repair our increasingly decrepit freeways, which have huge potholes in them, even in the fast lanes? Most people use the auto to get around. What right do you have to take our tax dollars and to fulfill your transportation agenda? Why should government be involved in providing jobs, building housing, or telling us how we can get around? Why should government mandate limits on greenhouse gases, or CO2, a life-giving component of our atmosphere? It's amazing to me that the federal EPA agency has deemed CO2 a pollutant that should be regulated. And I believe Steinberg's SB 375 is totally unconstitutional. Thank you.
Thank you. Azubuike, and then Marshall Loring. Marshall.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Azubuike Akaba. I'm with the Regional Asthma Management and Prevention part of the Public Health Institute. So I'm concerned with the scenarios. They're very detailed, and I feel like we actually have not had enough time, being one of the technical people, to review the scenarios. And I've also signed on to a letter which suggests that we create an additional scenario which has been supported throughout the social equity, the equity groups, in order to actually do meaningful participation with the process. I'm really glad that we have diverse audience responses, so it shows that this is about a democracy. I think that our group is interested in the equity, environment, and jobs. That's how we're going to get there, and I think that the preferred scenario should include those things, and we should have enough time to respond. So we're actually asking for not to be fast-tracked in the process, to give us enough time to work with the staff, and I think the staff is open to working with the community groups, and we'd like to ask for reasonable delays and more information so that we can work with the staff to get there. Thank you.
Marshall Loring, and then Dwayne DeWitt.
Good morning, Chairman Sperring, Commissioners, and committee members. My name is Marshall Loring. Some of you know me as a member of the Policy Advisory Council of Metropolitan Transportation Commission. And I participated in 2 meetings this week about these issues, which were the primary motivations for my being here. But before I get to that, and this may take me a little longer, I wanted to comment about some of the remarks I've heard about the workshops that have been conducted. I also participated in the workshop in San Mateo about the plan, and I want to commend the staff there. They ran the workshop very well. I agree with some of the comments about some of the points that were missing, particularly the economic issues. But in general, the workshop was well run and was appreciated by the participants. Having said that, I'll get back to the comments about this week. Before saying anything more about equity, one thing would be we need to get a consistent definition of the word equity. We spent a lot of time in both meetings this week sort of dancing around that issue when people really didn't understand one another and didn't agree with what they were saying. And it's very important that the issue of equity be given the attention it deserves in these alternate scenarios. I'm sorry you didn't have, apparently you don't have the resolution we passed in the Policy Advisory Council. It was rather detailed. I won't try to go into it because I don't trust myself to remember all of the fine points. And there were a lot of people who were very intense and very concerned about those fine points. But we did strongly emphasize the need for considering equity in whatever scenarios are being studied, and also that all of the scenarios that are given any serious attention should meet the greenhouse gas and housing goals that are set forth. So with that, I'd say thank you for the time and good luck in what you've got coming.
Dwayne, and then Stephanie.
Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm one of those tax-paying, bus-riding citizens, kind of overlooked in the big scheme of things. But equity, to me, I think would be a good job for me. Heck, a good job for everyone here. So I'd like for you folks to look at this idea of jobs and employment distribution first and foremost in this situation. You've stated you want to have things connected to reality. One of the harsh realities right now is jobs are not as plentiful as we'd like them to be, and they may not be in the future. They used to base them on building houses, and right now that's not doing so well, and actually repairing houses might not even get many jobs for folks. So in this whole sense of what you're trying to do, I'd like for you folks to look at the options that you've put forward and say, let's have another round of meetings. I know you probably don't want to do that, but it's actually probably for the best. You've got disagreements on many sides here today. You got lots of people saying, heck, that didn't work the way we thought. So let's go another round. We got nothing but time, folks. I don't really believe the world is going to end real soon. So I'm hoping that you folks will take your time, look at this thing realistically, make it better for us bus riders and taxpayers, and give us some jobs near where we live. And at the same time, go with options number 2 and number 4. Those talk about having priority development areas and increasing the fix it first. So fix the roads near where I live. That's my priority development area. Thank you.
Stephanie Reyes, Stephanie, and then Scott Peterson. If I don't have your card within 30 seconds, this is going to be my last speaker card, so get it in right now.
Thank you, Chair Sparing. Stephanie Reyes, Policy Director with Greenbelt Alliance. You know, one big question that we have clearly heard is really high in everybody's mind these days is economic development. How do we create and sustain jobs for the Bay Area? Jobs and jobs. And I agree. I want to talk for a moment about housing as a job creation strategy. For the past 7 years running, Bay Area CEOs have identified, quote, high costs of housing for employees as the #1 challenge to doing business in the Bay Area. The #1 challenge for each of the past 7 years. This is even within the last few years of the economic downturn. That is a serious problem. If we want to be bringing jobs to the Bay Area, we should be listening to what CEOs are saying is the problem in doing that. Now, I want to acknowledge that there are clearly difficulties that we face in trying to overcome our chronic housing shortage, municipal costs, market realities, et cetera. But if we as a region want to retain and improve our economic competitiveness and ability to attract and retain jobs, we need to do everything in our power to build more homes so that the basic economic law of supply and demand can help bring those housing costs down and make this place compelling for those CEOs. So I urge you to direct your staff, as we're doing these scenarios, to maximize our ability to produce the homes that we need to ensure a strong economy. Now, on a slightly more technical note, when it comes to the question of where homes can go, your Housing Methodology Committee, which is made up largely of local government folks, have done a lot of thinking about how to grow in a way that gives households of all income levels a choice and an opportunity to live in places with access to jobs, quality schools, parks, different ways to get around, et cetera. And so I want to, I guess, start the large chorus, which I think you've heard hopefully from your local government folks, who are requesting that one or more scenarios use that growth pattern that is being developed by the Housing Methodology Committee in one of these scenarios so that we can be consistent. And I think an equity environment and job scenario could be a really good place to use that methodology. Thank you.
And who are you?
Scott Peterson.
All right, Scott, I'm going to take you right now, and then Jeff's going to follow you. And the last couple speakers, please be brief. We're going to lose a quorum, so we can't take any action. And so, Scott, go ahead.
Scott Peterson with the Economic Development Alliance of the East Bay, and as an organization working in Alameda County and Contra Costa County to promote job growth and attract and retain business, we were pleased to see the information presented to you today that shows that folks attending the workshops for the SCS initial vision scenario overwhelmingly are interested in economic development and finding ways in which that this process can move us forward to a path towards greater job creation. As we've mentioned to you before, in the course of this ongoing process, we had concerns about the assumptions about economic development that were baked into the initial vision scenario, specifically that the scenario assumes robust economic growth over the course of the next 20 to 30 years. And of course, it's difficult to make those kinds of assumptions. We urge you to, in the next phases of this process, include more information and more analysis about what can be done to improve job creation and economic development throughout the Bay Area. And one of the things that we've heard from our members, as you look at these various options and alternatives, consider ways in which priority development areas can become places for experimenting with new ways to streamline regulations so that you can remove barriers to development, create more opportunities for investment, create more opportunities for projects to be accomplished more simply, more affordably, and that will help your local situation, but also the regional situation as this plan unfolds. So we'll be engaging with you in the next phase, and we appreciate your consideration of our input. Thank you.
Jeff Hobson. Jeff, set an example for the last two speakers and be brief, okay?
I'll do my best.
All right, thanks.
My name is Jeff Hobson. I'm a taxpayer, a father, a Little League umpire, a volunteer in my kids' school, and a few other things. Where I live and the way I get around, I have a lot of freedom to be able to get around. I appreciate that freedom to be able to get around on buses, on BART, on my bike or walking, and driving, picking the right thing for the right trip. I also work for Transform. And we sent you a letter that hopefully you've got, that's got a lot of details in it. We look forward to working with your staff on some of those. I want to highlight a few key points. One is to really ask you to make sure that you have your staff studying scenarios that you could adopt. So you have an apples to apples comparison. For example, from our look, the transportation option number 5 couldn't work because of cuts to the existing system. Second, I want to ask that you make sure your staff does a sensitivity analysis to show what would happen if we only model the transportation network we can afford. The last RTP had billions in shortfalls for operations and maintenance. Continuing shortfalls would restrict my freedom, your freedom, all of our freedom to get around and our access to opportunities. Third, I want you to use all the tools at your disposal. Put transportation policies into that scenario number one. Include express lane concepts in all of the scenarios. We gave details in our letter. And fourth, I want to join the Policy Advisory Committee and others in asking for an equity-focused scenario. Also, see letter for details. So look, I don't want anybody to tell me how to get around. I don't want anybody to restrict my freedom and to restrict my kids' access to opportunities. And I think the SCS can help us increase those freedoms. Thank you.
Mr. Nguyen?
Hi, I'm Bubang Nguyen from Urban Habitat. I wanted to thank staff on all the great community outreaching they've done in the past few months. I also wanted to bring out one meeting in particular that happened in Eastside San Jose among Vietnamese Americans that was put on by the Vietnamese Voluntary Foundation. Out of that meeting, there was two top priorities that came out, and it was affordable housing and public transit. And I think if you read the details of that report, you'll see how important it is to reach out to the low-income communities and communities of color in places like Eastside San Jose, which really haven't had a voice up here quite yet. And we think that looking at another alternative scenario that really looks at equity, jobs, and the environment really would be able to help communities like that. And we hope that you take a look at the letter that we signed on to and agree with that. Thanks.
Sam Temperman? Sam?
Hi, my name is Sam Tepperman Gelfand. I am also a taxpayer, a native Bay Area resident, and I work with public advocates. I wanted to make sure that in all the calls that you've heard to scrap the whole process, that you don't move forward without honoring the process that you've set up through your advisory committees, Policy Advisory Committee, the Equity Working Group, and also the Housing Methodology Committee. You have a very specific recommendation before you, which is to put a scenario into the mix that for study that follows the work and the important questions that those committees and bodies are considering. To miss that opportunity and move forward with the 5 scenarios on the table that do not reflect the work of those committees is going to make life extremely difficult for everyone down the road when you're trying to bring together and harmonize all the work and good thought that's going into that. You have 2 bodies that weighed in this week asking for a scenario to be added that addresses equity, environment, and jobs. You have 3 letters from more than 20 organizations that have been actively participating in this process and trying to make it successful. The Housing Methodology Committee, you've heard from a number of members of that committee today in joining their voice for such a scenario. And I urge you to pay attention to that, consider that carefully when you're making this vote, to move forward with the process that you've set up to harmonize all these incredibly complicated different goals that are being moved forward, and listen to those bodies that you've set up to advise you.
Thank you.
As you start with what are the disparities and burdens of our current system, how do we narrow those? You know, if we actually allocate our transportation investment and our housing investment, even according to our population, where do we end up? That we, of course, my personal interest is in walkable communities, that we make it safe and healthy. Personally, I had to watch my son die from a cancer that causes carbon dioxide poisoning. None of you want to either suffer that or go through that. Just why I support all of the work that you're doing for sustainable community strategies, and that we actually make the greenhouse gas reductions that this is all about. And we do that while housing all of the people who are going to live here, which is some great increase over those who are here now. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Okay, I'll bring it back to the committee. The last action item we have would be the defining alternative scenarios. Steve, did you have anything, hearing the testimony, we've received written comments or?
Mr. Chairman, obviously you have received a lot of comment today, and we've received some fairly detailed letters just yesterday. You know, we had listed this item as a committee approval item for today. I would suggest instead that we at least take a couple of weeks between today and your full commission meeting at the end of this month and allow our staff and ABAG staff to work together in responding to what you've heard today, and then you can be the judge at the commission meeting about whether we've responded adequately and could act at the earliest at that time. That's what I would recommend we do.
Okay, well, we have members from ABAG here. I mean, how will these members fit into that?
Well, look, that's one of the difficulties of doing something together. As I understand it, ABAG's board does not meet until next month. There are several members of both boards on the commission, and as I represented, we would be working with ABAG staff to present a joint recommendation to the commission. Now, if you'd prefer for the two bodies to act together in a parallel way, we're going to have to wait a month. And I don't want to minimize the amount of work once we decide on what these scenarios are that Ashley and Ken and all of their colleagues will have to do.
Okay, Mark,
yeah.
you have
you know, we do have 7 members here of the administrative committee, and rather than just giving the impression that they totally wasted their time in coming here today for, since in some cases before 10, I'd just like to hear from them as to, I mean, I know as we have the other thing, we could, you know, again, I just go back to the page in here. It says in the staff report, it says that staff seeks the committee's review and approval so that we may immediately begin the technical work. You know, in MTC's case, that we can delay 2 weeks. In ABAG's case, it'd be delaying 6 weeks unless we actually come back with the administrative committee simultaneously with the MTC board meeting later in the month. I mean, we could do that. But I just want to throw out to the committee members who are here on the ABAG standpoint that perhaps you would be fine with at least giving direction today on the 5 scenarios or the 6 or some combination of that. So I'm just willing to hear what my members would have to say, Commissioner Sparing.
Yeah, I think
that's fair.
Yeah, I think it'd be appropriate if the ABAG members want to take a position on this, and then we can just defer that to our full commission and have further discussion. So if you'd like to do that.
Julie, you got any thoughts? I mean, actually, I mean, I know everybody's. I mean, let me just back it up here. First of all, from my standpoint, on both sides, being on both sides of the fence here, both ABAG and MTC, I think that the 5 scenarios that we have out today, we should proceed with all of those. My questions or points on all of these are this, though. On each one of these 5, again, if we have 2, and I think that all members need to keep in mind, we have 2 things that we have of essence. We have to get the greenhouse gas reduction target, whether or not you believe it's radical socialistic government or not. I could care less about that stance. But we have to hit that. Secondly, we have to hit the housing targets by all income levels. So to me, to be running scenarios that we already think aren't going to be doing that seems like a waste of time unless we make all 5 of these. We need to come up with a way to hit those 2 targets in all 5 scenarios. I don't care what it takes, you know, 89% electrical vehicles by the year 2025. We need to see what that number is. We need to make all 5 of these hit both of those targets, or else it's a worthless scenario to be going through. And as far as the other 8 targets, no, we do, Tom, or else what are you doing up here then? Then the other 8 targets, which we added on as options, and I say options, we put those as targets, but again, those aren't state mandated. Those are options which we put on, those other 8 performance targets. I think at some point we'll have to make a decision as to how close we come to all of those in any of those 5 scenarios. But those first 2, those state mandated scenarios, we need to be showing that we hit those in every different permutation on here. And I agree with some of the speakers. There needs to be, you know, I guess it's not going to be down to a 10 cents or 5 or the nearest nickel. But it would be nice to have some estimations. What is the cost of hitting each one of those 5 scenarios? We've hit these. To me, the logical thing for us to have, we hit these 5 scenarios. We hit the 2 targets in the 5 scenarios. What is the cost in each one of those scenarios? Then, public policy makers, you know, they can face their constituents saying, "Well, I opted for option A, and it costs $500 billion, or we could have gone for option C and it cost $350. Okay, that was their decision. Whether they're going to elect them again or not, that's your decision also. But we need to be seeing those kinds of numbers in front of us. So with that in mind, I would suggest in my ABAG compatriots that we move forward with the direction of the staff to start this process on the 5 scenarios.
Okay, yes, Julie?
I appreciate all the speakers we've had here today, and they've had a good bit of chance to talk and give us their opinions. We haven't had time to have a discussion at all. And frankly, I agree with much of what Mark just said, but I have a list of other things that I wanted to raise. Jack just poked me and said he's willing to come back in a couple of weeks and do another meeting. I'm more than happy to do that. I bet most of the admin committee would. If you would be willing to help us meet together, you know, before your other meeting or something, so that we don't slow down the MTC approval of this in 2 weeks. But I think really the ABAG land use side of this, those of us who sit on the Housing Methodology Committee as well as other committees, really need to have a chance to fully have a discussion around this table of what we need to see out of this, because we had several speakers here today expressing their opinions. I know the rest of you, as local elected officials, just like me, have had your phone ringing off the hook and having emails in your inboxes to tell you what your constituents think too. We need to represent that. That's our charge here, is to be the local elected official representatives. And I think it's really important that we bring that back to another collective meeting and have
Okay,
before you vote.
ABAG can do that, and I mean, the MTC commissioners, we're going to have another shot at this anyway, but...
No, I'm talking about a joint meeting.
Yeah, we can, absolutely. That, and I have, if you want to try and structure that and find a date that we can do it, I will make myself available. I'm sure other committee members will also.
If I may, I think the easiest solution is for the ABAG admin committee to meet at the same time as your commission takes this item up, and simply have that joint meeting take place for that item, and therefore we can stay on track.
That's fine. That would work. Yeah.
I agree, absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, in the public meetings, you know, a lot of the comments I heard today, I attended ours, and I talked to people after the meeting, and they very much appreciated the meeting, but they felt it was very structured, that it was difficult for them to get their ideas into the process. And so I thought that was a very valid criticism, and I thought maybe it was just restricted to Solano County, but it sounds like it wasn't. But, you know, overall, the feedback that I got from my county, the people that attended, they thought it was very well done, and they thought it was an additional perspective, but they did feel it was fairly constrained as to how you could introduce new ideas or concepts into it. So with that, then let's go ahead and defer this to the joint. Oh, I'm sorry, Jack. I'm sorry, or Mark.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your light.
Fortunately, I think I'll be at my daughter's wedding in Detroit in a couple of weeks, so I'll miss that. But I agree with the general direction. I just want to point out, you know, this is a planning document. It's not a regulatory document, and it's just trying to anticipate what is likely to happen and how we can best prepare for that. I think the whole idea of reducing vehicle miles traveled is what we need to do for social equity. People in the lower to moderate income levels are not going to be able to afford the transportation prices that we're going to have in the future. So the idea that we're creating higher density jobs, higher density development closer to jobs and transportation is the responsible thing to do. I think some of our scenarios need to realize that people are going to move without building any new housing, and there is going to be a reduction in vehicle miles traveled, so that should be factored in as just part of the natural course of things. I can't really distinguish which of these 5 scenarios best address that until we see some of the technical information. I do want to see the opportunity for another scenario to meld into some of the comments that we've heard today that we may not have anticipated here. I guess that's what I got to say.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Any other?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Tom.
Yeah,
and then
very
Jay.
briefly, Tom Bates, Alameda County. I agree, just briefly, I think between now and then when we hear it again in 2 weeks, that I would like to know more about how the social equity would fit into the various scenarios. And then there's been a suggestion of having a separate track on that, and I don't know how that would work, and I would like staff to investigate that and come back if they understand how that might work and present that at that time.
And I appreciate that. I think that's a good.
Yes, I find myself in the very pleasant position of agreeing with Mark Green, particularly on his observation that we should not be spending time pursuing a scenario that doesn't meet our targets. I believe that strongly, and also that since we did set these 10 indicators, that I would like to hear as to how this is going to be incorporated into the analysis. And finally, agreeing with Mayor Bates, if in fact we can't add scenario number 6, then how to fit in that social equity component that our Policy Advisory Council came up with and has been referred to today, then that is work for staff as well. And my process question, Mr. Chair, is this is the 10th. Our commission meeting is on the 22nd. Is that sufficient time through you to MTC and ABAG staff?
Why don't we find out?
Well, there you go then. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Steve, Mark Green's comments about the cost or the value on each one of those scenarios, is that something that can be done?
I may have missed that comment, so can you, Mark, Commissioner, can you just repeat it so I'm clear what you want?
Well, here's what I'm saying.
Is this about toll bridge hikes again?
Yeah, it might be actually. It's about committed funds.
Well, we know it's got to be more than $1, right, Mark?
If it's about
committed funds on toll bridges.
If it's about toll bridge hikes, forget the question. Let's move on.
Whatever it takes. To me, I'm just using the 5 for right now. The 5 scenarios that we have here all have different land use components, all have different levels of other initiatives being needed to be implemented. But to me, each one of those need to be driven to where both the greenhouse gas as well as the housing targets are achieved. And with that, seeing what kind of a cost, and I realize it's not to the nearest nickel, but some rough estimates in terms of cost that each one of these would take to achieve those first 2 goals, and then seeing, I admit, how the other 8 targets which we've placed in there, how close we get to each one of those by hitting the first 2, which are the statutory requirements.
May I say something? I think it's important that we respond carefully to those comments, and there really isn't enough time right now to get too deeply into what is required under the statute. Clearly, the measurement of greenhouse gas emissions is required under the statute. It's also required that our adopted scenario be forecasted, realistic, and feasible. And we were going to try to measure as much as we could accomplish based against our housing need, but what we were proposing in these alternatives were in fact scenarios that could be adopted and would meet the standards of the statute. Now, there needs to be more explanation about what exactly we're talking about, and I think we'll provide that in our next staff report that addresses this issue more clearly. There are many complex issues here that we need to resolve. We simply don't have time right now, I think, to get into it, but this gives us an opportunity to meet with the committees, the Equity Analysis Committee and the Policy Advisory Committee, and clarify how we were going to build our RENA equity analysis into these scenarios, how our equity program is built into our priority development areas through complete communities, and hopefully get into more consensus that we're going to be meeting everyone's expectations with how we do these alternatives.
Okay, unless I'm misreading the question, I think what Mark's saying is it physically,
here's what I'm saying.
Is it feasible?
I don't expect that in 2 weeks.
No, okay.
I'm expecting that when all these when the technical work through the scenarios is done, I am expecting them to see some kind of gross estimate of billions of dollars that is going to take to implement.
Absolutely, that's the reality check. Absolutely,
and I understand the question, Mr. Chairman, and you will get that.
Okay,
absolutely.
That's why I raised it. Yes,
Mr. Chair, I guess what I'd like to suggest, since we're going round and round, I think we all agree that we're not ready to make a decision act today. I would suggest that we try to shoot for our commission meeting and a joint one if they have the information that they feel is complete enough to give us on that day. If it requires more, then we could not have it that day. But I think, we heard a lot of things today, a lot of input, good input from all the way around, and I think we need to digest that and make sure that we can formulate, those responses in a way that are directed towards what we're trying to accomplish. And I do agree, we have some regulatory guidelines that we need to look at, and that's how this all started. So, Ezra, I appreciate that. But I also think if 2 weeks isn't enough time, don't rush it for sake of time. This is a plan that we're going to have to look at, and we have to evaluate the technical sides of it. So I would say let's shoot for 2 weeks, but if in fact both of our executive directors really don't think that's realistic after they start getting into it with all the comments that were made, I would suggest that they just let us know and move it to potentially another joint meeting a month from now. I'm not suggesting we have to, but I just don't want to rush something for sake of rushing and not getting answers to the questions and comments that were made today.
Yeah, this is a process comment, and it goes along with Councilmember Pierce's comment, and that is that, and also Madam Chair's comment, and that is the great amount of public testimony we heard today, and given the mechanics of this particular meeting, we lost a lot of the people who we would want to be here to participate in a discussion. And I have to reiterate again what Councilmember Pierce said is most of us who sit around here are elected officials. We are responsive to our constituents. They're the folks who vote us into office and vote us out of office if we don't please them. And we need to have time, all of us, to have a discussion. And we weren't able to have that today. And this is a far-ranging discussion that needs to take place amongst all of us. And so the mechanics of the commission meeting, to me, Mr. Chair, through you to Madam Chair, need to have some serious time built in so that these discussions can take place, as well as hearing from the public. Thank you.
Does anybody have any burning last comments? Okay. Good.
I do.
Oh, yes, go ahead. We haven't heard from you. Rose, thank you.
I just want to reemphasize the notion of the request for the social equity piece, because that's something that's been talked about for a long, long time. So it's not a part of the scenarios right now, but certainly given the consistent discussion about it and the fact it's been raised again, I think it's extremely important that we include it.
And I also agree with one of the speakers. There better be a definition of what that means.
Yes, I actually wrote that down too. So yeah, that is important as well.
Okay, no further discussion on it. I had one speaker card for public comments. Marilyn Melander. Marilyn, did you feel compelled to address us?
I do.
Good.
I came all the way over here and canceled something else I was doing.
All right, well, let's hear from you.
Okay. I would love to see one of you folks, you have a lot of people that are employed here, get one of your riders to justify your existence under the U.S. Constitution. I don't think you have a right to even exist. That's just me, okay? I believe the regional government entities, MTC and ABAG, are unconstitutional and lead to increasing centralization of government by their very nature, cannot fulfill the constitutional mandate of government by and for the people. A well-known axiom states power tends to corrupt. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. I look around and see this multi-million-dollar building with all the employees and expenses, and I know it is entirely unnecessary. You spend our tax dollars planning the future of the regional citizens. There's no constitutional mandate for regional government entities, let alone a centralized regional government, with the power to tell us where we can live, where we can work, and what mode of transportation we can use. That is exactly what you're spending our money for, to plan our future. You're using false population statistics and the false premise of global warming, now known as climate change, to justify your efforts. Our increasingly unconstitutional federal government supports you with our tax dollars and violates our rights by allowing you to decide how our tax dollars will be spent once again on housing, transportation, and the cost of your own regional government administration, which is huge. I was going to make some comments about the minutes to another meeting that you have, but I'll just give these in as a letter, my comments. And I also have two pamphlets, one for ABAG and one for MTC if you're interested, called Understanding Sustainable Development Agenda 21 for the people and their public officials. I can only hope somebody might look at it. Thank you.
Okay, well, until we're deemed unconstitutional, I'm going to come down and represent Solano County to cover my interests. So with that, if there's no further comments, this meeting is adjourned, and I think staff has direction.